America feels like it's breaking. The media blames culture wars, gender, race, politics. But beneath the noise, there's a deeper fracture. While millions of Americans struggle to just get by, a small elite has steadily reshaped the country's institutions to serve their interests. If you divided America by how much wealth each group owns, it would look like this. The poorest 20%, tens of millions of people, would own just enough to fill a single state, Arizona. The next 60%, America's middle class, would stretch just across the rest of the West Coast, from Washington to California. The wealthiest 20% would own everything else. And within that, the richest 1% alone would own enough wealth to cover the entire East Coast. It wasn't always like this. America once promised upward mobility, but over the past 4 decades, the income of the top 1% has skyrocketed by 574%, multiplying their wealth nearly 6 times. Meanwhile, the bottom 20% have seen their incomes jump by just 30%, barely outpacing inflation. Today, it's common to romanticize of a golden age of America. Trump practically won an election promising to bring it back. But are people really longing for a time of racial segregation and lower wages? Or are they desperate for a society where they once again feel like they have a fair shot? Because inequality isn't just about money. It's about power, about who gets to shape the rules, and who is left behind. And over time, that inequality has quietly eaten away at the very foundation of American society, turning the American dream into a distant memory. So how did it get this bad? And can it still be saved? Here's how America got to its breaking point. To understand how inequality in America became what it is today, we need to go back to what many consider to be the golden age of the United States, the 1950s. For millions, the American dream was finally becoming a reality. It was a time of new cars, sprawling suburbias, and of course, economic growth. In the 2 decades following the Second World War, the US economy doubled in size. For context, that's a similar rate of growth to what we are seeing in China today. And here's the thing, this wasn't just money going to the rich. The explosion in economic growth came hand in hand with falling inequality. By the 1940s, the share of income going to the country's top 10% had fallen to the lowest level in a century. The country's middle class was rapidly expanding, and by the 1960s, 60% of Americans were considered middle class, up from 30% in the 1930s. Citizens filled their homes with new consumer products. TVs, cars, washing machines, once luxuries only the rich could enjoy, were now available to everyone. And while the country was far from perfect, the trend was clear. For most Americans, life was slowly getting better. Capitalism was working as an engine of prosperity for all, and when the economy grew, everybody benefited. But as the saying goes, nothing good lasts forever. And this is exactly what happened to America. By the early 1980s, things were beginning to change. A new school of economic thinking began to dominate the political landscape: neoliberalism. The idea was simple: reduce the size of government and allow the free market to unleash its full creative potential. By cutting back on regulations and taxes, the thinking was that the wealth generated by the system would gradually trickle down to the rest of society, lifting everyone up in the process. And when Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1981, that's exactly what he did. The top income tax rate, which had hovered around 70% for decades, was slashed to just 30%. Trade barriers were dismantled, markets were deregulated, and globalization was championed, all sold on the idea that economic growth would make everybody better off. And for a while, it worked, at least on paper. Since the 1980s, the US has enjoyed the fastest rate of economic growth in the developed world. At the start of the neoliberal revolution, the average US citizen made about $12,000 more than the average European. But by 2023, this gap had almost tripled, growing to $31,000. But there was a problem. For the first time in nearly a century, income inequality also began to rise. Suddenly, economic growth no longer meant rising living standards for ordinary Americans. From the 1940s all the way through to the 70s, the bottom 90% of earners saw huge increases in their incomes. But from the 1970s, their incomes remained totally stagnant. So where did all the growth go? Mostly to the rich. Over the same period, the top 1% of earners saw huge increases in their pay. The middle class, once considered the backbone of the American economy, began to slowly vanish. But here's the thing, all of the indicators that are used to show economic success were still going up. The country's GDP was rising fast, tripling in size from the 1980s to today, and the stock market kept going, increasing by over 1,400% in half a lifetime. Even unemployment, often a barometer for the livelihoods of those on lower incomes, remained low. But the reality was that under the surface, the quality of life for the average American had remained totally stagnant for decades. Capitalism, once thought of as a system guaranteed to improve the lives of everybody, had totally failed. This is a really important topic, so I decided not to take a sponsor for this video. Instead, I wanted to quickly tell you about our new Instagram page. We're posting short daily explainers on economics, geopolitics, and how the world really works. If you've liked the videos so far, consider giving it a follow. It really helps us, and more importantly, it gets more people into these topics. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Now, back to the video. America was built on a promise that no matter who you were or where you started, you could build a better life. But today, that idea seems to be slipping out of reach. Today, somebody born into the bottom 10% of US earners has only a 7% chance of making it into the top 10%. By comparison, an American born in the 1940s had a 90% chance of earning more than their parents. But for the generation born in the 1980s, that number had shrunk to just 50%. The country that once led the world in opportunity has become one of the hardest places to climb the ladder. Of course, this crisis hasn't gone unnoticed. In 2024, reducing the level of inequality polled as the second most important issue for the president to address. But here's the thing, for most issues, gaining enough public support is practically a guarantee of some